my wife yelled. I should have married Marcus. At least he's ambitious. So I invited Marcus to dinner. What he admitted left her in tears. I used to think silence was worse than shouting. I believed that when two people stopped fighting, stopped arguing, and stopped caring enough to raise their voices, that was when the relationship was truly dead. But one night, I learned the opposite. Sometimes a single shouted sentence can end everything more brutally than silence ever could. It happened on a Wednesday, after a long workday for me and what was supposed to be a quiet evening at home. My wife, Diana, had been edgy for weeks. She worked part-time as a freelance designer, though lately most of her projects seemed to involve endless phone calls that she would end quickly whenever I walked into the room. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. I told myself it was just stress, maybe unpaid invoices, maybe a difficult client. But on that evening, whatever had been simmering finally boiled over. We had argued about something small, the kind of household annoyance couples usually forget in minutes. I think it was about a repair bill I had delayed, or the groceries I forgot. Her eyes narrowed, and her voice sharpened, and then she spat out the sentence that froze the air in our living room. I should have married Marcus. At least he's ambitious. The name hit me like a slap. Marcus. I knew who he was. Everyone did, because he had been part of our past before Diana and I got married. He wasn't just an old friend. He was the man she had dated before she met me. He was the one her parents used to mention with a kind of approving tone, the safe bet kind of guy with business connections, the kind who always made sure to be seen shaking the right hands. Diana had told me years ago that Marcus was too arrogant, too obsessed with appearances, and that she didn't want that kind of man in her life. She said she wanted someone stable, grounded, someone she could actually trust. That had been me. So hearing his name now, hurled like a weapon, felt deliberate. She knew what it meant. She knew how deep it would cut. I didn't shout back. I didn't even move. My chest tightened, and the words echoed in my head long after she stormed off into the bedroom and slammed the door. For hours, I sat in the living room replaying it. The anger was there, yes, but beneath it was something colder, suspicion. Why Marcus? Why now? That night, I barely slept. I lay in the dark, listening to her shallow breaths beside me. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured her face when she said it. Not just angry, almost careless, like it wasn't an empty insult, but a truth she had already been holding inside. The next morning, I tried to act normal. She made coffee, avoided eye contact, and went through the motions of her day. I kissed her on the cheek before leaving for work, but my mind wasn't at the office. It was circling the same thought. Had she meant it? Was Marcus still in her life somehow? I started noticing details I had ignored before. She guarded her phone like it was state property. The screen always flipped down when she set it on the table. If she got a text, she tilted the screen away before reading it. When she said she was working on design drafts, her laptop screen always seemed to be on some chat window instead. And then there were the receipts. We shared a joint account for most household expenses. I had never scrutinized it much, but one afternoon at lunch, I opened the banking app and scrolled through. That was when I saw the pattern. Small charges, recurring weekly. Nothing extravagant, usually between $20 and $30. But they always appeared on the same nights, Tuesdays and Thursdays. The location caught my attention, a bar across town. A bar I knew because Marcus had once held a birthday party there, years ago. The coincidence was too sharp. I stared at the screen, the digits blurring. I didn't want to believe it. Maybe she was meeting friends. Maybe it was just a place she liked. But the thought nagged me. Why hadn't she ever mentioned it? Why was she going there on the same nights, quietly, without telling me? That evening, I tested her. I told her I had to stay late at work for a project. In reality, I drove home early and parked down the street. The plan was simple. See if she left, see where she went. At 7, the front door opened. She stepped out in a coat I hadn't seen in months, one she usually wore for special dinners. Her hair was styled, makeup carefully done. She wasn't going to meet clients. I followed, my headlights off until I was a few streets away. She drove directly across town. My chest pounded the whole way, each red light giving me a moment to consider whether I really wanted to see where this ended. When she finally stopped, it was in the lot of the same bar I had seen on the receipts. She went inside quickly, head down, as if she didn't want to be noticed. I waited. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. I was about to convince myself to go home when the door opened again. She stepped out, this time not alone. Marcus. He was older than I remembered, but still carried himself with the same self-satisfied air. He walked beside her casually, like this was routine. They didn't touch, but the familiarity in their movements told me everything. They crossed the street together toward a quieter restaurant. She looked comfortable, relaxed, even smiling. I gripped the steering wheel until my hands hurt. In that moment, I understood her outburst. It wasn't just anger. It was a comparison she had already been making in secret. I thought about confronting them right there, pulling up, rolling down the window, demanding answers. But something stopped me. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was fear. Or maybe it was the realization that I needed proof. Words could be denied. Photos could not. I took out my phone, zoomed in, and clicked. Several shots of them together. Grainy, but recognizable. Evidence. Back at home, she returned later than usual. She claimed she had been meeting a friend about a design project. I nodded and didn't argue. Inside, the fury was burning hotter than ever, but I forced myself to stay calm. Confrontation now would only give her time to prepare excuses. Instead, I began planning. I searched through more bank statements, cross-referenced dates, and built a quiet map of her movements. It all lined up: the charges, the nights, the disappearances. Marcus was always the common thread. One thought kept circling back, louder each time. If she thought Marcus was so ambitious, so worthy, then maybe she should hear what he really thought of her. And maybe she should hear it not in whispers behind my back, but across the same table where she once promised me loyalty. So I made the decision. I reached out to Marcus. The message was simple. I told him I was hosting a dinner, that Diana would be there, and that I thought it would be a good chance for us all to catch up. I didn't mention what I knew. I didn't reveal anger. I worded it casually, as though I were extending an olive branch. To my surprise, he agreed quickly. Perhaps curiosity got the better of him. Or maybe he thought he had the upper hand already. Either way, the hook was set. When Diana asked me later in the week if we had plans for Saturday, I smiled and told her yes. I said I had arranged something special. She didn't press for details, and I didn't give any. But in my mind, the stage was already being built. This wouldn't just be dinner. This would be exposure. And when Marcus walked through that door, she would realize her outburst had started something she couldn't control. When I woke the next morning after sending that message to Marcus, I wasn't sure whether I had made the smartest or the most reckless decision of my life. Inviting the man my wife had thrown in my face into my home felt like handing over my pride on a silver platter. But I also knew this. The only way to expose the truth was to let it bleed out in the open, where denial couldn't survive. I didn't tell Diana about the invitation. In fact, I didn't tell her anything at all. That week, I went about life as if nothing had changed. Breakfast together, the same small talk about weather and bills, a kiss on the cheek before work. Outwardly, I was the same husband I had been for years. Inwardly, I was an investigator, piecing together a case. I started with her phone. Not directly. I wasn't foolish enough to try to snatch it while she was awake. But at night, when she finally drifted into sleep, I carefully shifted her hand away from the nightstand and pressed the home button. The lock screen glowed in the dark, mocking me with the 6-digit code I didn't know. Still, the previews on the screen gave hints. Repeated notifications from a contact saved only as M. Not Marcus spelled out, just an initial. Cautious, but too obvious once you already suspected. The next step was the laptop. Diana often left it in the living room, plugged in and charging. One evening, when she was in the shower, I opened the lid. No password. Relief hit me like a wave. I moved quickly, scanning through her email. Nothing incriminating at first. Then I checked her folders. There it was, a hidden folder buried under design project names. Inside, I found screenshots of chat conversations, mostly cropped, saved as if she were collecting them. Words exchanged between her and Marcus. Snippets about next time, about keeping it quiet, about him not suspecting. The words weren't explicit, but the intent was written between every line. My stomach churned. I wanted to throw the laptop against the wall. But instead, I copied everything onto a flash drive. Evidence. After that, I tracked her movements more closely. I told her I had a new client who required late hours, but instead of staying at the office, I parked near Marcus's apartment complex. I learned his schedule, when he came home from work, when he left again. More importantly, I learned hers. On Tuesday, she left our house at 6, claiming to meet a client. I followed at a distance, headlights off until traffic forced me closer. She drove straight to Marcus's neighborhood. This time she didn't park in the bar lot. She pulled into his building's garage using the code he must have given her. My chest tightened as the door shut behind her. I waited. Hours passed. The sun went down. At 10, she finally emerged. Her hair was messy, makeup smudged. Marcus walked her to the car, leaned close enough to whisper something that made her laugh, then gave her a quick kiss before she slid into the driver's seat. It was no longer suspicion. It was fact. I snapped photos, hands shaking. The evidence wasn't abstract anymore. It was real, undeniable. That night, when she returned home, I asked casually about her evening. She smiled thinly and said the client meeting had gone better than expected. I studied her face, the way she avoided my eyes, the faint perfume that didn't belong to her. I nodded, told her I was glad, and went to bed without pressing. Inside, though, I wasn't glad. I was documenting, recording her lies in memory. each one another nail in the coffin of trust. By Friday, I had enough material to confront her outright. But confrontation wasn't what I wanted anymore. Shouting would only give her a chance to twist the narrative. No, I wanted her own accomplice to undo her. That was why I had invited Marcus. On Friday evening, I received a reply from him confirming Saturday dinner. He wrote in short, confident sentences, as though he were amused at the idea of dining with me. Maybe he thought I was clueless. Maybe he thought Diana had spun a story that painted me as naive, weak, or desperate. That was fine. Let him believe that. When Diana came home later that night, I kept my composure. We ate dinner in silence. At one point, she mentioned she might have to step out tomorrow evening for another client. I smiled and told her not to worry, because I had already made plans for us. Her face tensed for a split second, then relaxed. She didn't ask what the plans were. That alone told me she was nervous. On Saturday, I prepared the house as if nothing unusual was happening. I set the dining table neatly, opened a bottle of wine, and put on some low music. Diana asked what the occasion was. I told her she'd find out soon enough. She dressed casually, but I noticed she applied makeup with more care than usual, perhaps fearing who she might see. At 6 sharp, the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, Marcus stood there in a blazer, smiling with that same arrogant confidence he had carried since our younger days. His eyes flicked past me toward the dining room, and for the first time I saw a flicker of surprise in his expression. Behind me, Diana froze. Her wine glass trembled in her hand. The three of us sat down at the table. Conversation at first was stilted. I asked about Marcus's work, his recent ventures. He boasted about a promotion, about investments, about connections in the city. Diana remained quiet, sipping wine too quickly, eyes darting between us. I steered the conversation toward ambition. I asked Marcus what drove him, what kept him chasing success. He leaned back, smirking, and said some people settled too easily, while others kept pushing. His glance toward Diana was subtle but unmistakable. The air thickened. I watched Diana squirm, her fingers gripping the stem of her glass. She tried to change the subject, asking about vacations, about hobbies. But Marcus was already leaning into the trap. At one point, after a second glass of wine, he laughed and said something I'll never forget. She had always told him she regretted not choosing differently years ago, and that it was funny how life circled back. He said it casually, as if it were a harmless joke, but the words sliced through the room. Diana's face drained of color. She set her glass down with shaking hands. I leaned forward, keeping my voice calm, and asked him to repeat himself. Marcus looked at me, then at her, and smiled in a way that told me he enjoyed the discomfort. He repeated it, word for word. The silence afterward was deafening. Diana stammered, searching for words. She muttered something about him exaggerating, about old history being twisted. But the damage was done. The slip had exposed not only her contempt, but also the fact that Marcus had been a confidant all along. And he wasn't done. He leaned in slightly and said that it was impressive how calm I was, because most men wouldn't be this composed if they knew half the things he knew. That was the moment I realized Marcus didn't just accept my invitation. He came to test me, to see how much I knew. And he had just revealed there was far more beneath the surface than I had uncovered. The dinner wasn't over, but the tone had shifted. Diana was pale, Marcus was smug, and I was steady on the outside while inside a storm brewed. Saturday night wasn't going to end with pleasantries. It was going to end with the kind of truth no one at that table could deny. The moment Marcus let that line slip, I knew the evening had shifted from an act of observation to an act of demolition. He wasn't here to play the polite guest anymore. He wanted to watch Diana sweat, and maybe he wanted to see how much I could handle before breaking. I stayed calm, sipping my wine slowly, my eyes never leaving his face. Diana kept her gaze fixed on the table, her hand trembling as she adjusted the fork that didn't need adjusting. I let the silence stretch, because silence is its own kind of weapon. People rush to fill it when it becomes unbearable. Marcus smirked, raised his glass, and finally broke it himself. He said that regrets were powerful things, that they had a way of clawing back into our lives, whether we wanted them to or not. Then he glanced at Diana again, and added that some people didn't realize how much they missed until it was too late. Diana whispered his name like a warning, her voice barely audible. He ignored her. Instead, he leaned forward, elbows on the table, and looked at me with that smug half-grin he had probably perfected since college. He told me he admired how composed I was, because if our positions were reversed, he would have torn the house apart by now. He said most men would rather smash a bottle against the wall than sit politely at a table with the man their wife still confided in. Diana's face twisted in panic. She told him to stop, her tone desperate, the mask slipping. That desperation was confirmation enough. She wasn't worried about Marcus lying. She was worried about him telling the truth. I stayed steady, because control was the one thing I refused to give away. I asked Marcus if he was suggesting that he and Diana were still closer than they should be. He gave a small shrug, as if the answer were obvious. Then he said she had reached out months ago, first under the excuse of catching up, then with a different tone altogether. He said she told him she felt stuck, that she wasn't sure she had chosen right, that she still thought about him when life at home felt dull. Diana tried to interrupt, her words tumbling over themselves, saying he was twisting things, that she had only meant she wanted advice, that he was exaggerating for effect. But Marcus wasn't exaggerating. If anything, he was enjoying dragging it out, savoring every second of her unraveling. He told me she had begged him to meet her privately, not once, not twice, but regularly. He told me she had slipped him money from our account to cover his business expenses, small amounts at first, then larger ones, because she said she wanted to feel like she was investing in something ambitious, something bigger than the life she had with me. My stomach clenched as the words sank in. Money. That detail had never come from my investigations. I had seen the small bar charges, the dinners, the hints of time stolen. But I hadn't known she had been pulling from our joint funds to bankroll him. My pulse thudded in my ears. Diana slammed her glass down and demanded he stop talking. Her voice cracked, and tears welled in her eyes. She turned to me, pleading, saying I couldn't believe this, that Marcus was trying to poison me against her. But her words rang hollow against the cool confidence with which Marcus delivered his story. He leaned back then, folding his arms, and said that she had asked him to leave the city with her, that she had said if he agreed, she would empty her savings, walk away, and build a new life with him. He paused before adding, with deliberate cruelty, that he never planned on agreeing. He had enjoyed the attention, the desperation, but he had no intention of throwing away his career for someone who couldn't even be loyal in her own marriage. That was the moment Diana broke. She covered her face with both hands, sobbing into her palms, muttering that it wasn't like that he was twisting it all. But Marcus had already gutted her in front of me. He had taken whatever illusion she had left and smashed it on the table between us. I watched her cry, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt nothing. No pity, no shock, no sorrow. Just a calm acceptance that the marriage I thought I had was a lie stitched together by convenience and habit. I stood up and went to the kitchen, not because I needed space, but because I needed her to sit there in that silence with him. I wanted her to feel the weight of what she had set in motion. When I returned with another bottle of wine, neither of them had moved. Diana's shoulders shook with every shallow breath. Marcus just sat there, looking smug, as if he had won something. I poured another glass for myself and set the bottle down without offering them any. Then I told Diana to look at me. She lifted her head slowly, mascara streaking down her cheeks, her eyes swollen and red. I told her I had been watching for weeks. I told her I had photos, bank records, and copies of the very conversations she thought she had hidden. I told her the dinner wasn't just a test. It was the conclusion of an investigation I had been building step by step. Her lips parted as if she wanted to speak, but no sound came. She folded in on herself, curling into the chair, the weight of exposure crushing down. Marcus chuckled under his breath, as though the whole thing amused him. But then he leaned forward again and said something that caught me off guard. He said he never loved her, not when they were young and not now. He said he only entertained her because it was easy, because she had come crawling back, and because he enjoyed being the one she confided her regrets to. He said he had no interest in a life with her, no matter how much she begged. Diana flinched at every word. It was cruel, but it was also liberating. He had done the work I no longer needed to. He had stripped her illusions away with surgical precision. I leaned back, folded my arms, and let the silence return. Diana whispered apologies, fragments of excuses, promises that she could explain. Marcus smirked, watching her crumble. And I sat there, detached, knowing the trap I had set had sprung exactly as planned. That night ended not with shouting, not with dishes breaking, but with something colder. Marcus left without ceremony, tossing his napkin onto the table and giving me a nod on his way out the door. Diana collapsed into tears as soon as he was gone, clutching at my sleeve, begging me to listen. I didn't move. I told her the papers were already in motion, that she had made her choice long before tonight, and that I was simply finishing what she had started. She begged harder, her voice raw, but I stood and walked upstairs without looking back. She had wanted ambition. She had wanted Marcus. Now she had nothing but the ashes of both. The house felt heavier that night than it ever had before, but for the first time in weeks, I slept soundly. The house was quiet the next morning, but it was not the calm of peace. It was the silence of aftermath, thick and suffocating. When I came downstairs, Diana was at the kitchen table, eyes swollen, her hands wrapped around a mug she hadn't touched. She started to speak as soon as I entered. her voice hoarse, saying she hadn't slept, saying she needed me to listen, saying she could explain what Marcus had said. I didn't answer right away. I poured myself coffee, sat across from her, and placed a manila folder on the table between us. Inside were copies of the screenshots, bank statements, and photos. She reached for them with trembling fingers, flipping through each page, her face paling with every line. I told her I hadn't been blind, that I had seen her slipping away long before the outburst that broke us. I told her I had gone through every record, every message, and that her lies had only made my case stronger. She tried to interrupt, but I held up a hand and reminded her of the words Marcus had spoken in front of both of us. There was no denying them. For once, she had no script. She stammered half-formed excuses, trying to insist she had never intended to leave, that she only wanted validation, that Marcus twisted her words. But she couldn't erase the money, the meetings, the secrecy, and she couldn't erase the fact that I had already been to a lawyer. I slid another paper across the table. It was a draft petition for divorce. Her eyes scanned it, then shot back to me in horror. She asked if I was serious, if I would really throw away years together over what she called a mistake. That word set me off more than anything Marcus had said. I leaned forward and told her this wasn't a mistake. It was a series of choices. Every text, every payment, every evening spent in another man's apartment was deliberate. She wanted ambition. She wanted Marcus. And she had gambled that I would stay too blind or too weak to notice. She had lost. She broke down, crying loudly now, begging me not to do this. She swore she loved me, swore she had only been confused. But I had stopped listening. I stood, left the folder on the table, and told her she could stay in the house until the papers were filed, but she would not have access to the accounts anymore. I had already closed the joint card and frozen transfers. She shouted my name, pleaded that she had nowhere else to go. I didn't turn around. The following week was a blur of legal meetings and quiet evenings where we barely crossed paths in the same house. Her demeanor shifted rapidly from pleading to anger to cold indifference, as if cycling through tactics might undo the inevitable. But the evidence was overwhelming, and the attorney made it clear the court would side with me. The funds she had siphoned to Marcus would be counted against her share. The savings she thought she could use as leverage were already accounted for. Word spread faster than I expected. Friends began to distance themselves from her. Her family, who had once sung praises of Marcus years ago, now turned on her, embarrassed by the scandal. She called her mother one night. I overheard, begging for help. The conversation ended with the phone slammed down and more sobbing. The isolation was becoming real, and she knew it. But the final blow didn't come from me or from the courts. It came from Marcus. It was 3 weeks later when he called me directly. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. His voice was casual, even amused, as if none of this had scarred him in the slightest. He asked if Diana had told me everything. I said she had told me enough. He laughed and said she hadn't, because there was one more thing I deserved to know. He told me that from the very beginning, he had no intention of being with her. Not when she first reached out, not when she started sending him money, not even when she begged him to run away with her. He said he entertained her because it was pathetic how far she would go, because he enjoyed having her crawl back after years of rejecting him. He admitted that his business struggles had been exaggerated, that most of the money she sent went straight into his personal accounts to cover luxuries he didn't want to pay for himself. And he admitted that the dinner at my house was the perfect chance to watch her break. I gripped the phone tighter as he spoke, but not out of anger. It was clarity. He had used her just as she had used me, and the two of them had been circling each other in a game neither could win. He said he respected me, in a twisted way, for orchestrating that dinner, because it allowed him to walk away with the upper hand. Then he hung up, leaving me with the sound of his laughter still echoing in my ear. When I told Diana what he had said, she collapsed completely. She screamed at me that he was lying, that he had manipulated her, that I couldn't take his word over hers. But her protests were hollow. The desperation in her eyes told me she knew it was true. She had thrown away everything, only to discover she had been nothing more than a distraction to him. The divorce finalized swiftly. I kept the house, the savings, and the accounts. She left with almost nothing, moving into a small apartment across town that she could barely afford on her inconsistent freelance income. Once, I saw her at the grocery store, pushing a half-empty cart, her eyes sunken and tired. She noticed me, but turned quickly down another aisle, unable to face me. Marcus vanished from our circles. He had no reason to stay connected once he had wrung what he wanted out of her. Last I heard, he had moved on to a new city, chasing another opportunity, leaving wreckage behind like it was part of his business plan. As for me, the months that followed were strange. There was relief, yes, but also a hollow quiet I hadn't expected. The evenings felt too empty at first, the silence of the house echoing against walls that once carried laughter. But gradually, I learned to live in it. I filled the space with my own routines, my own stability. And in that quiet, I found a sense of control I hadn't felt in years. Sometimes, I replay the dinner in my mind. I see Diana's face crumpling, Marcus's grin widening, my own steady calm. It feels less like revenge and more like a trial where the truth had finally been forced into the open. She had gambled with both our lives and lost to both of us. And in the end, Marcus's ambition and her desperation had destroyed each other. The consequence was simple. I walked away intact, and she was left to live with the weight of her choices.